Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. Tonight's discussion is about empathy. What is empathy? Does that mean sympathy? No, it doesn't. But one of the characteristics of the cluster B people is they don't have empathy. And I'm here to try to pull in some example of an employment situation to try to illustrate this, because I was thinking about it and realized that, you know what, this is pretty interesting as far as empathy goes. Because a regular, normal, which means non-disordered human, they feel empathy naturally. So if your best friend comes to you with a cut on his or her hand and it's bleeding, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, oh you poor thing. But with the cluster B, they don't feel that way. They're probably like looking at the blood hoping to see more. But my point here tonight is to illustrate the concept of empathy, which I happen to believe relates 100% to the cluster B mentality when it's explored in the setting of a workplace. I know it probably makes no sense to you now, but I'll just tell you. I used to work in a collection department for a large credit card bank, and we would be trained to recognize the different stages of delinquency on credit card accounts. So we learned how to tell if it's 1 month past due, 2 months past due, 3, or so on, and then we would be taught, well, here's what they owe, here's the amount behind, here's the amount for the month, here's the... And we would learn all these things, but one of the requirements for us in collections was if somebody's late, and they're, of course, calling us, we're answering the phone, if they're late, we had to document why they were late, which to the customer may seem like, because we'd ask, well, what's the reason you've fallen behind? And they'd sometimes be like, that's none of your business. And of course, the sarcastic me would be like, I beg your pardon? Honey, it's literally my business. You're late and you owe this company money. What's going on? But I rarely said such things. But anyway, that's beside the point. But that was one of the rules. We had to ask for the reason. Well, the main goal here in this business was you get them on the phone, you verify whatever, you tell them what's due, you resolve the issue, and you hang up. End of story. Well, of course, part of that was documenting why they fell behind. Well, what would end up happening is they didn't really put a lot of focus on why they fell behind. It's just we had to document why. So, and somebody new came in and was listening to random calls. The big executive person who's new in town would listen to a call, and because we weren't really trained in relation to anything to do with the human side of things, because it's more like you're a machine. Take the call, get the money, and get off the phone, is the kind of the message they were sending. So you'd listen to collection calls, and you'd hear things like this. Yes. Hi, this is Narcopathia, and I show that you owe $100. It's past due for 3 months. Would you like to pay that today? And then we'd hear, oh, I can't pay that today. Oh. And we, of course, had to note the reason. So I'd be like, "Oh, well, what's preventing you from paying this?" And they would say something like, "Oh, I just found out that I'm dying of cancer, and I just found out my 2 children were murdered, and my husband's going to be hung by another country's government." And the person on the other end of the phone would be like, "Oh, well, when are you going to make the payment?" Well, somebody heard that and realized that sounds completely heartless, which is your narcopath, basically, because the person in default is like telling you their horror story, and the listener's like, "Oh, really? Well, when can you pay this?" Well, that is clearly like non-human, which again doesn't apply to your friend or your family, because keep in mind, it's like you're working at Walmart at the door and you're standing there saying, "Hi, hi, hi." Well, if somebody walks in tears saying, "Oh, my boyfriend just left me," you might say, "Oh, that's too bad, but do you really care?" No, it's just another person. Well, with the collection area, it was the same kind of concept, because we just had to note the reason for the delay in payment, but you hear these sob stories and you're like, okay. And I could hear or understand how it might be for an employee to be hearing this horror story and they're like, "Oh, that's nice. So, when can you pay?" And somebody somewhere realized that is wrong, because that is cruel. That is, even though we don't know the caller, we don't need to be so cold. So they had to give us empathy training, which is kind of funny and kind of sick, but at the same time, in real life, you don't need that. But in this life, well, probably what contributed was credit card companies became like widespread. So if this credit card company doesn't care about you, well, you can throw that away and go to that credit card company. So I think the executives realized that, you know what, we're just one of 100 companies. So they then taught us the empathy part, which meant if a person told us, "Oh, my cat just drowned in the pool," well, we would have to, even though we don't know who they are or who the cat is, we'd have to say, "Your cat, oh, it's so terrible." And again, it's not real, but that's just the way it worked. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is because it relates specifically to the Cluster B people, because they're like us, the employees, who don't give a crap about anything other than what we've been taught, which is, here's the amount due, can we get the payment, what time can we get the payment, and what date. And the empathy part was just like never focused on. Well, with the Cluster B, they don't have any empathy, just like the employees didn't, but they'll pretend to. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting viewpoint on the discussion of empathy. Because, again, the employees, they have empathy in real life, but when you're on the job, it's kind of like, okay, we've got to collect the money, and what was it behind for? Oh, okay, so when can you pay? Well, that's like a natural progression for the way we're trained. But of course, customer service was more of a focus down the road, which, thank you for calling, my name is India. Anyway, hopefully you got something out of this to understand how those without empathy may have to be shown, but you can't fix the Cluster B. But at least it illustrates in the workplace setting. I just found it interesting. So you think what you want.
Please stop human cloning. This is like my 10th body, and I am sick of it. Yes, we both agree. Facebook is retarded.
Look, I don't know what's wrong with you people. Why do you give TJ so much attention? He doesn't have a clue.
So I gained a bunch of weight.
My name is Courtney Love, and I